Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Ashok Mathur. I'm the Dean of Graduate Studies and the Interim Vice President of Research and Innovation here at OCAD University. I'm really happy to see everyone here, and whether you're here live or you'll be checking this out on our YouTube channel, the Contingencies of Care Speakers Series. And before I introduce Kristin Moriah, I want to acknowledge, of course, the lands that we are on. OCAD in its brick and mortar format anyway is located on the lands of the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe, as well as the Huron-Wendat and the Mississaugas of the Credit. I know many of you are on different territories, east, south, north, west of here, and I would just urge people, of course, to reflect on those lands and what they mean and the histories that have been embedded in these spaces. History is a very interesting thing because our recent history, the last week or so, as we know, has been incredibly difficult for those of us paying attention to what's happening in the news. We've been used to seeing a lot of differences, things happening around COVID and such, but the violence and the reminders of the violence that have happened in the last couple of weeks, the 215 out of Kamloops, and there will be a vigil for those 215 children later next week at OCAD, and people are welcome to attend that. I'll let you know about that. Of course, the news coming out of London, the tragedy and the violence there. It affects our bodies and affects us spiritually, it affects us emotionally, and affects us physically. And I just want to acknowledge that for those of you who I'm not able to see and speak to right directly, right? So I'm conscious of that. With that, I would like to turn it over now to our guest today, Kristin Moriah. I told Kristin I wasn't going to do an extensive bio, but I'll just read a couple of lines. She did her doctoral work in African American culture and English literature at CUNY Graduate Center. And she's currently a Penn State University Center for Black Digital Research partner. And her work is being supported by fellowships from SSHRC and the Rare Book School of the University of Virginia and the Harry Ransom Center. And I believe she's working at Queens, and she's doing a lot of things, and she can speak more to her interests as she presents this discussion with you. And I'd urge people also to see her upcoming book, Dark Stars of the Evening, and hopefully she can talk a bit about that as well. So without going into any more labor on this, I'm going to turn it over to Kristin. And I'm also going to apologize in advance that I do have to leave this room in about half an hour. So the questions can either be fielded by Kristin herself or with the help from Masha, who's working with us today. So Kristin, over to you.
Thank you so much, Ashok. I'm just honored, thrilled, and a little bit nervous to be here. I was telling Ashok, this is the first time I've been asked to give a presentation to a group of artists before. So we'll see how it goes. I'm going to try my best, the best I can as an English professor who is embarrassingly committed to formal structures of presentations, and to speak casually about my work and the way that CARE has shaped the structure of two of the major projects I'm working on. And if we have time after the discussion, I'd like us to spend time listening to the work of sound artists Mendy and Keith, and specifically Lull, a Sleep Temple, as a way of finding rest and relaxation. Mendy and Keith have explained that the title Lull, a Sleep Temple points both to a need to pause and to sleep temples, which are places to rest or dream. Historically, sleep temples were sites in ancient Egypt where people went and entered a sleep-like state for healing and dreaming. And they say that in Igbo and African American cultures, dreams are still understood as extremely important. Sleeping and dreaming are ways to connect to something larger than our conscious minds. So again, I'd like to start this presentation by, once again, really thanking Andrea Fatona and Ashok Mathur for the invitation to join you here today, and to Masha Shirakova for organizing the visit. I join you today from Kingston, Ontario, where I live and work. Kingston and Queen's University are situated on traditional Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee territory. And this territory is included in the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy and the Confederacy of the Ojibwe and Allied Nations to peacefully share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. The Kingston Indigenous community continues to reflect the area's Anishinaabeg and Haudenosaunee roots. And there's also a significant Métis community, as well as First Peoples from other nations across Turtle Island. Living and working here has its ups and downs. So last summer, I was asked to join a committee that would advise our principal as he searched for a new chancellor. And that search ended successfully with the appointment of Murray Sinclair, the chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. But in light of the Kamloops discovery, uncovery, or revelation, the work that Justice Sinclair has urged Canadians to do remains at the forefront of national and international conversations. And the role of universities like Queen's in these conversations is also once again central. I personally want to know more about the role that institutions like Queen's have played in the maintenance of the residential school system, and I hope that we're getting there. My consideration of these issues and my acknowledgement of the intertwined nature of land and the social role of the university is not just a formality. I want to not only highlight the intentional failings of the Canadian residential school system to provide care for Indigenous children, but to probe the ways that other historically underrepresented groups have attempted to create spaces for survival in the belly of the beast. And I don't know if this is actually possible, but I probe it nonetheless, and I hope that it provides us with a kind of touchstone as we work through these ideas together. A couple of weeks ago, a former student asked me to participate in a panel on intersectional feminism in the workplace. It was a very corporate event, but I tried my best to use the platform to advocate for the importance of humanistic inquiry, language, literature, and words. I told them about the way author Colson Whitehead used Canada's residential school system as a model for the Dozier School that is the main setting of his most recent novel, The Nickel Boys. In an interview about the book, Whitehead says, "I came across the story of the school in 2014. They wanted to sell the property, the state of Florida did, and they started exhuming the official graveyard, and they found a lot of unmarked graves. And some archaeology students started excavating the unmarked graves and trying to ID different students who'd been there. And the story stayed with me. You know, if there's one place like this, there are many places. And maybe it's a reform school, it's an orphanage." Talking to some folks in Canada, they talked about residential schools where Indigenous kids were taken from their families and put into schools to learn about white culture, and the same kinds of abuse happened. And it seemed, if the story hadn't been told, someone needed to tell it. And of course, the story had been told time and time again, but those in power refused to listen. Yet I think that there's something that we can gain here from the connections between the school to prison pipeline that preys upon Black youths in Canada and the US, and the struggles of Indigenous peoples across Turtle Island. If these educational systems are widely accepted and acknowledged to be sites of violence for non-white people who cross their thresholds, then the formation of the disciplines that those trespassers or interlopers have wrought requires close scrutiny. Now, I'll attempt today to think through both formally and informally the ways that fields like Black studies in particular have been a site of care for Black feminist scholars, although not always and not for everyone. Part 1, on being cared for. Sylvia Wynter reminds us that we are a storytelling species. And so as a way of illustrating the networks of care that brought me to this place, I'm going to tell you a story. When I started my Ph.D. at the Graduate Center, I was very new to New York. I was fresh off the boat. And I met Jerry Watts, Dr. Jerry Watts, at the open house for new students. Jerry took me under his wing and provided me with a summer stipend in my first year in the city. He bought me lunch every day. And prior to going to the Graduate Center, I really had no idea who Jerry was and of his place in the field at all. It was really just somebody I met at an open house event and who I think sort of recognized the strange position I was in as a Black Canadian, largely sort of separated from my family and friends, and really struggling to make a place, right, within the institution itself, which remains in some ways, I think, very inhospitable and very challenging for Black students. Again, you know, on my day-to-day in terms of my own sort of survival in the city in that first year, Jerry really played an instrumental role, doing things that seem sort of small in some senses, right? Like buying me lunch, but with a really minuscule graduate fellowship, and as somebody who was constantly in a precarious housing situation in New York City, it made a difference between whether or not I ate at all on some days. And I wasn't actually the only person who Jerry looked after in that way. And the institute that he ran, IRIDAC, the Institute for Research in the African Diaspora in the Americas and the Caribbean, actually became a sort of home for Black students within the structure of the Graduate Center. So if you've never been there, the Graduate Center is actually located in what used to be a very formal department store, an old style department store in New York City. And when the department store sort of collapsed, the city bought the structure and eventually it housed the Graduate Center, but it still has a very sort of cold, sort of office-like feel. And yet IRIDAC, the offices of IRIDAC themselves really became a major site for Black students where people would meet and just sort of go to do their daily work. I remember going to the grad center each night after classes I audited at Columbia because the contrast was so overwhelming at times. When I was at Columbia, I was really in a space that was overwhelmingly dominated by a certain upper class whiteness. And it was disorienting actually after spending so much time at IRIDAC in the Graduate Center with other Black scholars who were so comfortable and at ease with themselves. This story, unfortunately, doesn't have a great ending. Jerry died of a stroke when I was about halfway through my program. It was a difficult loss, and he is dearly missed. But one of the things that I hold on to from that experience of mentorship and working with Jerry at the early part of my doctoral program was really an open letter that he penned to his students. And I think Masha has that link and it was posted in the chat, and maybe we can either repost it or perhaps show everybody. It's the last link. Unfortunately, it's the GC Advocate link from 2015. So it's quite a complicated text because it was written by somebody who was actively struggling with writer's block and had openly struggled with depression. But I want to highlight the open letter, and I also pinned it to my Mila note board because I think that it really shows the importance of care to Jerry's idea of what intellectual life should be. And I'm really struck by one paragraph in particular in which Jerry writes that any and all graduate students need support communities, a group of peers or friends that one can turn to whenever one needs emotional or intellectual support. You will continue to need support communities when you complete graduate school, etc., and for the rest of your lives. A support community can keep you moving along. And what's more, a support community can give you a sense of perspective as you confront various problems. Your emotional support community often cannot be the community you go to for unbridled criticism of your work. Readers of your work who function as critics need only be people you trust to be honest and thorough in their evaluations. You need not be close friends with them. So part 2, on care as a disciplinary foundation. But what do we want anyway, and for whom do we think we're doing it? I contrast Jerry's letter with Gabrielle Forman's A Riff, a Call, and a Response, an essay about the conscious choices that need to be made when contributing to a discipline. In Forman's work, I see an opportunity for care. In that essay, Gabrielle also consciously writes herself into a lineage that includes people like Nellie McKay and Barbara Christian, Black women who contributed much to the foundation of African American studies, but who also died prematurely. Shanna Benjamin, a former student of Nellie McKay, mines some of these tensions in her recent biography of McKay. And these women are my not so silent partners as I move forward in my own work. And I'm conscious of the toll that it takes on Black people and the losses represented by the field, and also of the ways that we are deeply connected. Part 3, the stakes of care work. And this is where I get a little bit more formal, and I just start telling you about some of the partnerships that I formed and the ways that I hope care is sort of embedded in the structures that we're creating together. So since joining the Department of English Language and Literature at Queen's University, I've begun working closely with Gabrielle Foreman, the founding director of the Colored Conventions Project and the director of the Center for Black Digital Research at Penn State University. We established a formal research partnership in fall 2019. And in that capacity, I co-organized the Mary Ann Chud Carey Symposium that was supposed to be held at the Delaware Historical Society in April of 2020, which was going to be the first of its kind to bring activists and academic researchers and independent scholars and creative professionals from both Canada and the US, who were all invested in Mary Ann Chud Carey and some of the themes that sort of drove her work. An edited collection was going to extend from that meeting, but of course, you know what happened to all events that were planned in spring 2020. Thanks to COVID, we've now begun to pivot to an online platform for much of that work. So hopefully that symposium will take place this fall. The Colored Conventions core team is a group of scholars, graduate students, librarians, and undergraduates who are based all over at this point. So we've got folks who are still based at the University of Delaware, Ph.D. students who began working with the Colored Conventions Project during their time there, and who have stayed connected to the center even as Gabrielle has moved to Penn State. There are Penn State graduate students. I have a student from Queens who is also contributing to the project. There are students also located at institutions in which their advisors are not directly involved in the project, but students who are nevertheless still contributors. And those project members represent a wide range of academic disciplines, including English, history, computer science. We really try to run the gamut. We have teaching partners who are really focused on introducing some of the archival research that's been done in terms of the Colored Conventions Project to their classes, right, and to undergraduate students, hoping to sort of spark archival inquiry and sort of new ways of working with archival documents, right, in the classroom. We have a variety of artistic partnerships that are taking hold, and including a new partnership with the Philadelphia Mural Arts Project. And so, you know, the work is really wide ranging. It's a large team. And, you know, we've been lucky enough to have support from other large institutions like the Modern Language Association, like the NIH and Mellon. During the pandemic, doing this work has meant participating in weekly meetings and discussions with the working groups. And I think that it's relevant and it's important to note that care is sort of built into the structure of these meetings. We start the meetings with check-ins. We end the meetings with something sort of similar to prayer circles in African-American cultures, where people sort of place the people that they care about into the circle. They place their concerns and their burdens into the circle, and we try to ease that burden from them, right? And we all sort of take up the responsibility of really focusing on those people and those care and that concern. There are other opportunities to connect with the group through movement, like online dance lessons and yoga. And there are also daily writing groups, even during summer, where members can just meet others online, sit with them and write for a bit. These attempts to integrate care into the structure of the workshop, I think, speak directly to the research goals of the project, right? And the recovery of the history of the Colored Conventions movement and its participants in both Canada and the United States, as they advanced these Black visioned, Black executed efforts that demanded Black lives and Black equality and Black dignity matter. So what we continue to learn from women invested in things like the Colored Conventions Project, invested in the Colored Conventions, minutes of the conventions and those movements speak across time and place to today's concerns and the needs for movement building in ways that make them relevant despite their sometimes seeming obscurity and their all but erasure as a major force in contemporary history and historiography. We undertake this work as a commitment to recovery that includes historical and activist redress. I undertake this moment at a work in which my university, like almost all public institutions in Canada and the US, is wrestling with the practical and intellectual implications of what it means to incorporate principles of equity and diversity into every level of the institution, and with their ongoing desire to foster international collaboration. So the second example of care work within the discipline that I'd like to bring to the forefront is the Black Studies Summer Seminar. And so I think that link is great. Thank you so much. And so it's a comprehensive 1-week research intensive designed to produce generative and fruitful academic debates and professional development for PhD candidates, postdoctoral fellows, and pre-tenure faculty. And the goals of the Black Studies Summer Seminar include the support and preparation of pre-tenure faculty and the advancement, really, of the field of Black Studies in Canada. As Black scholarship, through its radical interdisciplinarity and cultural production, has always disrupted traditional disciplinary boundaries and the limits of institutionality, the Summer Seminar aims to honor these interruptions by centering collaboration and intellectual and creative exchange, and necessitating alternative modalities of knowledge production and the intramural. So this year's Black Studies Seminar, which is the first of its kind, is a collaboration between the University of Toronto Scarborough and Queen's University. And when we were thinking about sort of setting up the seminar and proposing this idea, my collaborator and I, Mark Campbell, really wanted to highlight the peripheral nature of Scarborough and Kingston to Toronto, right? That major center of Black Canadian life, and to really sort of play off of that contrast. We want participants to be able to sort of step outside of that space and its attendant pressures, if only momentarily, right? And to see what can be generated there. So 15 late stage PhD students and early career scholars will come together, will join us for 1 week. The week is organized into seminars, artist workshops, keynote presentations by local and visiting scholars, and opportunities for faculty mentorship and peer collaboration. And this year's program brings together research clusters and themes around Afro-Sonic life, Black archival studies, aesthetics and visual arts, Black geographies, and Black digital humanities. And woven throughout those themes is a close attention to the ways in which methodologies in the politics of care emerge, so as to draw out key discussions around the entangled histories and possible futures of Black political thought and radical imagination. Featuring preeminent scholars and artists whose work continues to shape Black studies across Canada and the US, the Summer Research Intensive provides a new generation of scholars and artists the space and care to critically explore the creative and imaginative possibilities of Black studies outside the constraints of siloed disciplines and isolated geographies. We did this because in the past 2 decades, there's been a remarkable proliferation in the academic and literary work produced on Black studies in Canada. Across a range of academic disciplines and non-academic institutions, urgently important and critical research is emerging through the continued efforts and attention of faculty and students across Canada invested in the burgeoning potential of Black studies as a radically interdisciplinary field of thought. Although the United States has a more marked presence of Black studies within academic institutions, through the historical inclusions of Africana studies and African American studies departments, preeminent Canadian scholars, artists, and activists have always unceasingly invested in the unfettered and scholarly potential of Black studies in this country through emerging initiatives, courses, and institutes. The Black Studies Summer School is thus intended to highlight this ongoing work within the field of Black studies by honoring genealogies and showcasing emerging scholarly research and artistic production through an interdisciplinary learning experience. The Summer Research Intensive aims to bring together graduate students, postdoctoral students, artists, and visiting scholars with concentrated interest in Black studies in order to create a shared space of knowledge, production, and critical inquiry. So one of the central goals of hosting the Summer Research Intensive is to design a common space for Canadian students and researchers whose work traverses a range of disciplines and international affiliations and institutional affiliations, some of them international, to congregate once a year, every summer, for the purpose of developing an ongoing project towards collectively reimagining what it means to think with and through Black studies across its different permutations. Additionally, the Black Studies Summer Intensive aims to achieve this by promoting thoughtful entanglements through the lens of diaspora, opening up Black studies beyond disciplinary silos that contain Black political thought and radical imagination within particular geographies, and instead as a site of shifting terrains, relations, and entangled histories. And in doing so, the Black Studies Summer Research Intensive will hopefully stimulate a collective project that honors both the overlapping political and intellectual traditions, as well as emerging interdisciplinary scholarship and cultural production within the field of Black studies. Moreover, by centralizing Black discursive and aesthetic traditions, not only defining Black communities, but as the very epistemological foundations underpinning and animating the infrastructures of many traditional disciplines across Canadian institutions today, our hope is to delimit Black studies from institutionalized abstraction and instead draw attention to the necessity of designing and preserving spaces for intramural Black discourses in order to be able to imagine its possibilities anew. Working against the grain of the coloniality of knowledge that naturalize the subject position and objects within and across the social sciences and humanities through obfuscation and abstraction and knowledge production by way of empirical positivism, the Black Studies Summer Seminar aims to center alternative modes of knowledge making and knowledge sharing through honoring brilliant scholarship and encouraging cross-disciplinary collaboration. In doing so, this research intensive, we hope, provides students with the opportunity to not only engage with scholars and thinkers within the field, but to collaborate with one another in different artist-led and student-led workshops and discussions, inviting the possibilities of thinking relationally in order to disrupt the individualization of research within neoliberalized institutions and beyond. Following the work of Black feminist scholar and educator Bell Hooks, who states, "One of the dangers we face in our educational systems is a loss of a feeling of community, not just a loss of closeness among those with whom we work and with our students, but also the loss of a feeling of connection and closeness with the world beyond the academy." An additional goal of the Summer Research Intensive is to cultivate intellectual gathering space for Black students, faculty, and cultural producers to be in social communion with one another in order to cultivate a learning environment that draws together intellectual congregationality as well as an atmosphere of mutual care and conviviality. So I want to conclude with an epigraph from Fred Moten and Stefano Harney, and then hopefully break into smaller groups where we can discuss some questions that will help us, that will help me to learn more about you, and I think to inform my own work as I think through how care impacts institutes like the Black Studies Summer Seminar. So in the undercommons, Fred Moten and Stefano Harney write, "Worry about the university. This is the injunction today in the United States, one with a long history. Call for its restoration like Harold Bloom or Stanley Fish or Gerald Graff. Call for its reform like Derek Bach or Bill Readings or Carrie Nelson. Call out to it as it calls to you. But for the subversive intellectual, all of this goes on upstairs in polite company among the rational men. After all, the subversive intellectual came under false pretenses with bad documents out of love. Her labor is as necessary as it is unwelcome. The university needs what she bears, but cannot bear what she brings. And on top of all of that, she disappears. She disappears into the underground, the down low, low down maroon community of the university, into the undercommons of enlightenment, where the work gets done, where the work gets subverted, and where the revolution is still Black and still strong." So as a way of concluding, I'd love to throw this back to you. And if you're willing to, ask that you perhaps gather into small groups just for a few minutes. And although you've probably had the chance to already meet one another and sort of communicate in different contexts, I'd love it if you spend a couple of minutes just talking about the instances in which you've received care in an institutional setting. And also to think about how research institutes can potentially foster care. So I'll put those two questions in the chat and then ask, if it's not too much trouble, if perhaps Masha, if she's still here, or I wonder actually.
Yes, yes, I'm here.
Masha, can you send us into breakout rooms?
Oh, let me check breakout rooms. How many breakout rooms should we have? 2?
I would like groups of 3.
We have 15 people. 5. Okay, I will create 5 breakout rooms. Oh, wait a second. I will create 4 breakout rooms. So like, because some of the rooms might have 2 people, so 4 rooms should work.
Okay, that would be perfect. Thank you.
Yes. And everyone will be mixed there. So I'm creating the rooms. See you.
Fantastic.
So hi, Tomo. Are you going to join the room?
I'm sorry, I just realized that I was on mute. Masha, I want to give folks about 2 more minutes, and then hopefully we can bring everybody back into
Okay,
the.
thank you. Do you want to go back to your room, or you would just stay here? You're muted again.
Let's keep it simple, and I'll just wait here.
Okay.
Yeah, I might have reached the limits of my my technological dilly-dallying for the day. So.
It's okay. Okay, I think I'm bringing everyone in.
Fantastic, thank you.
Okay. I hope it should be. If I close all the rooms, will be okay. Let's see. Okay, everybody's back.
Fantastic. So I wonder if you feel comfortable, if you could tell us a little bit about some of the ways that you've received care in an institutional setting. I've been thinking about care in terms of research institutes and my own graduate training, but I'd love to get to know you a little bit more and hear more about your experiences. So.
I sorry, I can start first. I was in a meeting room with actually first I'd like to say your presentation was really incredible. I feel like I connected to so many parts of it, and I actually had a lot of moments of being like, that's what that is like, and hearing you put it into language was a really amazing experience for me, so thank you for that. And I also, yes, thank you. So I was in the breakout room with one other person, Kevin. We were kind of talking about we're both students at OCAD, and we were talking about our experiences since we both kind of started the program during the pandemic. And I feel that I can speak to my experience if Kevin would like to talk a little bit about his experience, that I have felt supported in a lot of different ways about care. There's been specific conversations around care instead of it just being something that is expected or something that is implied. I feel like there's been some specificity on how we can care for ourselves and also for others during this time. There's also been an encouragement toward that with my professors, with some more leniency than if we were in, if we weren't experiencing what we are right now. And I've appreciated that. And I think a part of it too is being able to understand the different background and experiences, or not understand, but at least be aware of that people are coming from and what they might be living through outside of just this institution. And yeah, I guess that was my part of it. I don't know if Kevin wants to share some of his thoughts.
Thank you, Gio. I think you hit the nail right on the head with, I think what we wanted to say was cultivating care through communication and understanding different circumstances and background. Those were kind of really good care. Having more leniency is kind of care in that as well, right? Well, that would be an instance in which we received care in an institutional setting as students.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I can go next. It's Angela. Hi.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Thank you so much for your presentation. And Claudia and I just spoke together. And Claudia, you probably want to speak for yourself, but just to sort of summarize that we were both finding care in the institution in being heard and being listened to in ways which helped us to either develop our practice or develop thinking, and that actually really seems like a gift when it happens. And in fact, I would just say that my overall experience, I've just started at OCAD in September as a part-time student, so it's been a long time since I've been in an institutionalized environment, and it's all been online. But I think what has struck me most is initially I wasn't really 100% clear why I was drawn to the master's program at this stage in my life, but it was just something I felt such a strong pull to. It wasn't particularly articulated, but it was just like a magnetic pull. But the thing that has sort of struck me is that the OCAD has really instilled in me this idea that caring for oneself can take the form of art practice, of study, of working through ideas together, of tackling difficult subjects together, raw material, even though it's been online, as our classes went on, and after a few weeks you start to feel more comfortable talking together, that it's become a really essential way to care, not only for myself but for each other, in terms of listening and supporting, and in that way supporting each other's kind of dive into what's often difficult to understand, difficult to pick apart. So that's actually been kind of unexpected, that work of this kind can can fulfill all sorts of types of different care for myself and for others. I mean, my family feel, you know, the emanations as well. They tell me that sort of have started in class and then take hold in me and then expand outward sort of into the family. So yeah.
Thank you. I wonder if Claudia, do you have something to add as well? Oh, you're muted.
I'm sorry.
Yep.
It was terrific hearing your ideas, Kristin, and thank you very much. And I appreciate also, Masha, the links in the chat. I'm surely going to follow up on those. And Angela and I are both part-time in the program, and it has an advantage in that you're keeping one foot in whatever your discipline is outside of school. But the disadvantage is sometimes that because of course and program structure, you might not be in the same classes as some of your peers. So for example, my first year at OCAD, I had no studio classes. It was all theory. And it was a real shock to me. But as you found, Kristin, there was a particular prof who, when I approached her quite hesitantly to see if I could take her poetry class, and I mean, she is an icon in the community. She was so kind. She was eating her lunch. And here I am, you know, checking to see if she might allow me to be part of her fourth year class and then take it at a graduate level. And I felt so seen. I didn't have a label. First year graduate student. She saw and I think felt my desire and my wish to learn from her. And, you know, that really, it rekindled a sense of trust and care that then I was able to bring into my future interactions. And I guess that's what's left with me. When you're seen as a number or you have a label, it hardens the heart. And when you experience that care and understanding, it kind of melts the defenses and allows one to reach out to others in turn. So I'm very grateful for that individual for having softened my heart. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing.
I guess Isaac and I met for a bit, and what we talked about was some, you know, care in the context of sort of the decolonial kind of ways of thinking. And his experience has been entirely online, and I graduated in September, so all but the tail end of my classes were in person. So I'd had a somewhat different experience, but I guess the two major examples I came up with were circumstances where the faculty would have good intentions, but for example, library resources to research the area we needed were not available because OCAD has almost no library to speak of. And the University of Toronto, which does have the resources, is very territorial. So we were engaged in a kind of questionable practice because we were having to make up other people's experiences rather than being able to seek them out through the proper resources. Or the other thing I talked about in some detail was the experience as an international student with a group of international students shifting from in-person to the pandemic situation, and the province and the federal level regard as somewhat cash cows. So a lot of the kinds of resources that were available to other people were not there. And although Ashok, as our dean, was fabulous. There were really limitations to what could be accomplished in terms of solving any problems because of ideas about international students from the federal level. So it was good to have people to talk to and good that they had good intentions, but sometimes the structure of the university prevents actual solutions.
Mm-hmm.
I can just add one more thing there. Thank you as well, Kristin, for your presentation. Really, really helpful and wonderful ideas for all of us to think about. And wonderful to see the other people that I know in the school and other schools here. It's nice to connect a little bit here. My thought was about how this year has been so hard for so many people because of the pandemic and other reasons. And I, as was just mentioned, have never attended the school in person. So we're all kind of in our, I'm trying to talk. But Leona, shh. Part of what I was running into, what I thought was quite interesting was how specifically at the art school, Leona, please, is about criticality and this idea of how we're supposed to be thinking critically about our work and our research and the readings. And that comes up against ideas of care or maybe contingencies of care in kind of different ways, because we're thinking about how to kind of make accommodations for people who are in really tricky positions, or we can't be there in person, we can't concentrate. In my case, I have people in my house that are distracting me, but we're also meant to, we're also meant to really be critical about our work and about the stuff that we're working on, and that becomes quite challenging. And also we don't know how each other are feeling when we're chatting, and we're I mean virtually chatting, and cameras aren't always on. It's a very different context for this kind of learning, and I found that challenging. That's all. Sorry for the distractions.
No, not at all. I mean, gets to the heart of the matter in some ways. But yeah, I think that it's sort of frustrating in some ways to think about how you can build caring structures into the virtual environment that we're studying and living and working on, right? It adds a different layer. And I think that, I'm new to the profession, but in some ways, it felt as if the most you could do this year was really just like give people extensions sometimes. Although sometimes an extension is the most important thing in terms of what's happening in the classroom. But yeah, it can be quite challenging. Yes, exactly. Julia, your camera is on. Would you like to go ahead?
Oh, that's okay. I was I'm just listening right now. Thank you.
Okay, speaking of listening, my final idea for this session is actually to take some time to listen to this amazing piece of sound art by Mendy and Keith. And so I'll have to admit that the first time I listened to it, it was actually during its world premiere online, and it was very effective. In fact, so effective that I fell asleep. I hope that we do not fall asleep this afternoon, but I wonder if we can just spend maybe about 10 minutes listening to a little bit of lull and then coming back and closing out. Does that sound good? Okay, so I'm going to turn off my camera, but I'll try to share my screen and then we can listen together.
A light rain falls on the roof of the shed. made of tin. The sun sets and the day gives way to night. Who can remember what we said, what we wore, what we ate? The moon says paradise. The star says 7. We empty our pockets of memories and affix them to the wall. Nothing 6. The skill of keeping still is why the pines survive. Another eye is opening. It watches what was unseen before. There is a new shade of night. If the stars are imprisoned, it sets them free. we hearken the resonant voice of the owl, the quiet steps of the fox. Tune.
Okay. So that was about 10 minutes into low, and I highly encourage you to go back to that piece and sit with it. I think it's a really gorgeous way to invite people to rest, even while it's attentive to different elements of Black diasporic culture and African American culture and music and sound. That is, I think, it for me. Does anybody else have any questions for me, or is there anything else that I can, would you like to chat about? Absolutely, yes, rest is absolutely care. I have heard of the nap ministry, and I am looking forward to becoming a disciple once July hits.
One of the things we were trying to engineer in SFI at OCAD was a nap space. We
Nice.
didn't exactly manage, but we had a lot of fantasies about having a place to take a nap, especially for people who had a long commute, who lived like an hour and a half or 2 hours away.
I also remember trying to do that in graduate school, actually. We were looking at like sleep pillows that would encircle people's necks that you could maybe potentially like borrow from the library, but it didn't really work out. Yes. Okay, I think that this is it for this session, but I do look forward to seeing you in other sessions and in Milanote and in other spaces in this residency. I'm wishing you lots of peace and joy as we enter into the weekend. And I really do hope that you are able to, rest and find respite and also care for yourself in actually a genuine way within and without the institution. So thank you so much for your attentiveness today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
That was wonderful.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.